Alright, so we're going to be talking about net neutrality one last time. Actually, not a last time, but it's the last time before the vote happens by the FCC. Now, before we get into that, I wanted to really quickly say that we did break 11,000 subscribers. We're at 11,002. I do really appreciate that. Big thank you again to all of my patrons and all of you guys who have subscribed. I couldn't do it without you guys, and we will continue to push forward. But tomorrow is going to be December 14th, Thursday, December 14th, and this is the day that everyone who's used the internet is dreaded. The FCC will be voting on whether or not to basically repeal the net neutrality regulations that were put in place by President Obama's FCC. Now, the FCC is 3-2 in favor of Republicans, with Ajit Pai being the chair of the FCC. And we already know that that's his intent. His intent is to do this. The reason why he wants to remove these regulations is because he was a former, I believe, a lawyer for Verizon, if I'm correct. So basically, he is the industry that is supposed to be regulated, and this is kind of where the governmental corruption comes in. Basically, government is supposed to regulate the industry, but now what you have is the industry basically coming into the government and saying, oh, we're not going to regulate you anymore. So now this is extremely dangerous, because what we're going to see now is there's going to be a lot of throttling that can happen. It's going to basically allow these internet service providers, these ISPs like Comcast and Verizon, to basically throttle different companies and basically say, make it slower for certain companies so that they have to cough up more money, or else what's going to end up happening is they lose their viewer base and nobody watches, or nobody uses their service. Nobody's going to use Netflix if it's very slow. And we already saw that come up. We saw that Comcast throttled Netflix, basically saying, oh, we're going to make it slower for you. These peering systems are going to be a lot slower for you now, unless you cough up a bunch of money to bring it back up to that speed, even though data moves at the same rate. So this is going to be really dangerous for the consumers, for us, especially for people on YouTube. This can be very dangerous, because things like YouTube can just kind of disappear. And again, companies like Twitter and companies like, Netflix and Google are all supporting net neutrality, and it's because they will be directly affected by it. And I've already talked about net neutrality a few times recently with Steven Crowder and Ben Shapiro, because, they're wrong. Steven Crowder saying that it doesn't affect them. That is the reason why they're for it, is because it does fucking affect them. We saw that happen where Netflix was throttled by Comcast. Now, again, this will be really the end of the internet as we know it, and it is extremely unfortunate this is going to happen, because basically it puts the internet into massive, and I mean massive, danger when it comes to actually having equal. And this is the thing too, what it's going to do is it's going to further make the internet, which is something that I would argue is something that's pretty much necessary for life at this point, a rational thought process of saying, what is necessary for a normally functioning life. You need the internet. You need the internet nowadays for things like checking your grades, typing up papers, and, researching all of this kinds of stuff. So it's something that you need in your daily life. And this is what this is going to do, is it's going to lessen competition. It's going to make it more of a monopoly on ISPs, internet service providers will make it like that. And what will also happen actually is the internet service providers will be creating monopolies for the companies that they favor. So let's say that an ISP says, hey, or Comcast says, hey, we want Hulu to do better than Netflix because we own part of them. What they can just do is they can just go and they can basically they can make the internet slower. People who use things like Netflix and other streaming sites, and make that slower for them. What's going to end up happening is those people are then more likely to come, because they don't want to use that anymore because it's slow, it's buffering, etc., etc. And they will end up going to the other company, and then what will happen is that one will be the stronghold. And what it can do is basically strangle any new innovation in terms of making a new streaming service. And I said this last time when I talked about this. Netflix wasn't as big as it is today. Netflix at one point was an unknown brand. Nobody knew them. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody used it. And that's the thing. Things are going to come forward if net neutrality stays in place. So if we remove these regulations, there will be a good chance that these kinds of small, startups that eventually blossomed will not be able to come up because the playing field is so skewed. And also, if you have to start paying extra for using things like Netflix, it's going to cost you a lot more money as well. But the options are going to be less, and again, it's going to be very much more difficult to be able to actually do, to be able to come up. But this will be the last time that I'm speaking on this. Do whatever you can. It's trending on Twitter because Twitter is trending it themselves because they support net neutrality regulations, just as many of these companies like Google and Netflix support it. But the only thing that I could see happening, I guess, what's going to happen is basically it's going to be a 3-2 vote for the FCC. It's going to vote in favor of repealing these net neutrality regulations, and then unless there's some kind of miracle. And then the only things that could really do anything is if there's going to be people filing lawsuits and say that the FCC, the whole purpose of the FCC is to regulate, so you're removing the regulations, and they're saying that you're doing the wrong thing, and that's the only thing that could possibly happen. My understanding is Congress regulates executive agencies, so maybe they could have something done. But really what you would need to end up happening after that is you'd have to get the next president to be a Democrat, and then they'd end up having a 3-2 lead in the FCC because they appoint that person. And so that's really the only way to do it. But do whatever you can right now. Contact your Congress member. Ajit Pai is not really contactable. And I just read a story about how Ajit Pai was there was this video that he made, and he was joking about him being a shill for Verizon. He knows what he's doing. He is Verizon, and that's why he's trying to help them. It's so very obvious. And again, like I said earlier, it's like taking government, which is supposed to regulate industry, and then taking the industry into government and saying no more regulating. It's asinine, it's ridiculous, and it's absolutely fucking crazy. So, again, do what you guys can to stop these regulations from being repealed.